And we take a moment now to pause. So find yourself comfortable in your chair, your feet flat on the ground, your hands comfortably, or your feet wherever they are comfortable for you. And your hands on your knees or in your lap, your shoulders relaxed, your head upright, and take a deep, long, slow breath in through the nose and let it out. We pause for a moment in gratitude for being together today. We pause for a moment of gratitude for the roof over our head and the walls and the furnace as we live through winter. We pause knowing that there are those in our community, in our lives, who are not so blessed, who struggle with safety and health in this cold season. We hold them in our hearts and know that the hands we use to help them are the hands of love. We pause in silence together and hold in our hearts all those who struggle with illness, new or chronic, who struggle with just not knowing what tomorrow will bring. And we know that with the arms that we hold them, the arms with which we hold them are the arms of love. May our days be full of love. Amen. The reading I want to share with you today comes from science fiction author Ursula K. Le Guin, who wrote a story called The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. Now, Omelas is a fantastic city. It's a shining city. It's full of festivals and music and happiness and joy, and it's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful place. But there's a problem with Omelas. All of that joy, all of that festival, all of that wonder, all of that music is based on the fact that one small child at the center of that city is oppressed, is in pain and anguish. And should that child ever stop being in pain and anguish, the entire city will fall. And so the city lives knowing this. They all know it is there, all the people of Omelas. Some of them have come to see it. Others are content merely to know it is there. They all know it has to be there. Some of them understand why, and some do not, but they all understand that their happiness, the beauty of their city, the tenderness of their friendships, the health of their children, the wisdom of their scholars, the skill of their makers, even the abundance of their harvest, and the kindly weathers of their skies, depend wholly on this child's abominable misery. The terms are strict and absolute. There may not even be a kind word spoken to the child. Often the young people who see this go home in tears or in a tearless rage when they have seen the child and face this terrible paradox. They may brood over it for weeks or for years, but as time goes on, they begin to realize that even if the child could be released, it would not get much good of its freedom. It is too degraded to know any real joy. It has been afraid too long ever to be free of fear, its habits too uncouth for it to respond to humane treatment. Their tears at the bitter injustice dry when they begin to perceive the terrible justice of reality and to accept it. Yet it is their tears and anger, the trying of their generosity, and the acceptance of their helplessness, which are perhaps the true source of the splendor in their lives. They know that they, like the child, are not free. They know compassion. It is the existence of the child and their knowledge of its existence that makes possible the nobility of their architecture, the poignancy of their music, the profundity of their science. It is because of the child that they are so gentle with other children. At times, one of the adolescent girls or boys who go to see the child does not go home to weep or rage, does not, in fact, go home at all. Sometimes also a man or woman much older falls silent for a day or two and then leaves home. These people go out into the street and walk down the street alone. They keep walking and walk straight out of the city, through the beautiful gates. They keep walking across the farmlands. Each one goes alone, youth or girl, man or woman. Night falls. The traveler must pass down village streets, between the houses with yellow-lit windows, and out into the darkness of the fields. Each alone. They go west or north toward the mountains. They go on. They leave Omelas. They walk ahead into the darkness, and they do not come back. The place they go towards is a place even less imaginable to most of us than the city of happiness. I cannot describe it at all. It is possible that it does not exist, but they seem to know where they are going, these ones who walk away from Omelas. It's a harsh and a frightening story, and I share it with you this morning in knowledge that it's a little harsh and a little frightening. And I ask you to just hold it in your heart for a moment as we sing together number 391, Voice Still and Small. Today's sermon is about a difficult topic, and I don't want to apologize for the topic or the difficulty of it, but I want you to know that it is challenging. And so if you need to stop listening and just breathe, go ahead and do that. Take care of yourself. I also want to share that I just learned this morning that Joe Paterno, the coach of the Penn State football team for so many years, passed away early this morning from complications of lung cancer. And I want to hold his family in our hearts because we're going to talk about Joe Paterno a little bit today. And I want to remember him as a loving human being as well as a flawed human being like all of the rest of us. I was born in a small town in central Pennsylvania named Bellefonte. I was born there because my father was working on his PhD just down the road in State College at Penn State. My family moved to Canada before my first birthday, but I've always felt some connection to Penn State because of my father and because I was born there. My partner Mark also did his PhD at Penn State in the late 1990s, and so we lived in Bellefonte and became part of the life of Happy Valley for a few years. When we left behind many friends who we loved dearly. One pair of friends are the next-door neighbors of Jerry Sandusky. And so I have been watching with shock and sadness as the news from Penn State has gotten worse and worse, as we learn of how many boys were abused, as we hear more and more about who knew what when, and how little they did to stop it, as we watch students rioting in the streets in defense of their beloved Joe Paterno, and as we see one of the victims of the abuse bullied out of his high school because he dared to come forward. We see all this and we wonder, how could this happen? How could people let this happen? But how can we be stunned, really, when we've seen this happen in so many places? Change the institution and some of the details, and this could be a Roman Catholic church in Boston, or a residential school for First Nations children in Alberta, or the church I grew up in, where the choir master systematically molested more than 20 of his choir boys over a 15-year period, where the clergy knew what was going on and minimized it in almost exactly the same ways it seems like Penn State officials minimized it there. What's happening? People ask. Aren't there rules? Don't any of these people know that this is wrong? Well, I'd wager that if you'd ask any of the people involved in any of these scandals from the administrative end, not the perpetrators themselves, but those in the institution who had power to stop it and didn't. If you'd ask any of them if adult men should be molesting boys, they would say no. Certainly no. And yet they let it continue. Abusers knowingly allowed to participate in the life of the institution in ways that give them access to the vulnerable. Accusers are dismissed or undermined or driven out. Band-aid solutions are quietly suggested, and the abuse continues. What's going on? How do people who believe themselves to be moral creatures, who others believe to be upstanding pillars of a community, allow this to continue? Well, if you've lived for any time in a small college town, especially a football town, then you might have an inkling. State College is a town where the university, and especially the football team, are everything. Absolutely everything. It is identity. And leaders, and especially coaches, are more than pillars of the community. They become foundations for the community's identity. When I was born in Happy Valley, Joe Paterno was head coach at Penn State. And over 40 years later, until a couple of months ago, he still was. He's looked up to by thousands. He's idolized. For many, he is the institution. He and the football team and the university are all idolized. And that's the crux for me. The institution is idolized. It's made into an idol. Now, idolatry is the worship of the finite in place of the infinite, mistaking a symbol for the reality, worshiping the statue instead of the God who the statue represents. The Catechism of the Catholic Church broadens this to state that we commit idolatry when we honor and revere a creature in place of the divine, whether this be gods or demons, power, pleasure, race, ancestors, or the state. And I would add institutions there. I think we commit institutional idolatry when we hold the good of the institution above the good of those it serves or the community in which it operates, when we hold the safety of the institution above the safety of the powerless. This, I think, is part of what happened at Penn State. So much of the identity of the community is wound up in the goodness of the university, the greatness of the football team, and the saintliness of Joe Paterno and his coaches, that there can be a refusal of reality, not necessarily willful, often below our awareness, so that when faced with a decision that pits the good of an individual against the name or the survival of our institution, our default response may become to protect the institution. I think that Unitarian Universalist theologian James Luther Adams, whose words we read earlier, pointed us toward this when he was talking about the pitfalls of progress. The very means and evidence of progress, he said, turn out again and again to be also the instruments of perversion or destruction. He talks about the ways in which improvements in transportation led to an increase in rootlessness and instability, along with generating more social mobility. About the ways in which the printing press allowed irresponsible manipulation, along with increased access to information. And importantly, for what we're talking about here, he talks about how national pride, which allows for the growth and flourishing of culture and community and language, is also the breeding ground for jingoism and xenophobia. Our pride in our institutions and the way that we cement our identities through them can lead us to ignore the damage they can and do inflict. And our congregations are not immune to this way of thinking. Now, the church that I grew up in was not Unitarian Universalist, but we know that even our institutions are not immune. I just last week finished a course at my seminary looking at the issues of abuse. And it is a big topic of conversation among Unitarian Universalist ministers and denominational officials. We're focused so fiercely on clergy misconduct and professional standards right now, those groups are, precisely because this does happen, frighteningly often, even in our liberal, non-hierarchical communities. And I think our work ahead is twofold. We must be outspoken and prophetic in our congregations and in the public square to change attitudes and responses to the abuse of our children. We must raise the awareness of the extent of this abuse and teach our children how to protect themselves. This is where our denomination's work providing our whole lives experiences, that's our Unitarian Universalist sexuality education curricula, providing these experiences to the younger members of our congregations is powerful and prophetic. We can be very rightly proud of this work of recognizing and instilling an understanding of the sacredness of our physical, sexual selves and our right and responsibility to protect those selves, our own and others. But there's more. We must make it our work to build institutions and systems that are self-critical and which guard against being idolized. We allow our pride in our institutions to turn into neglect for those the institutions serve. And this is where our work creating safe congregations is so crucial. Building systems and patterns of right relationship, of open leadership, of clear procedures is the work we must continue to do. Over the past years, we have come to understand that awakening to and transforming the way our institutions and ourselves impact communities which are oppressed and marginalized is sacred, necessary, and healing work. So too will be transforming our institutions to be places of deep safety and nurturing. But what does that kind of institution look like? What are the ways we can build our organizations to be places of safety and trust? Some exploration. One set of ways is to do that, to build structures of accountability as we plan and implement our programs and our ways of operating. Congregations are encouraged by the Unitarian Universalist Association, for example, to create safe congregations policies, putting in place procedures and agreements around how our children are supervised, what training and commitments and screening our staff and volunteers have, how we agree to deal with disruptive and dangerous behavior in our congregations, and how we plan to respond should the unthinkable happen in our religious home. All of these things are helpful, imperative even, though we want to be trusting and loving and see the inherent worth and dignity in every person. We know that abuse is real and possible, and so we set up systems to reduce the possibilities of it happening. But constructing perfect systems, even if that were possible, is not enough. During a conversation about these issues, my colleague Connie Grant reminded me of these lines from T.S. Eliot's play, The Rock. They constantly try to escape from the darkness outside and within by dreaming of systems so perfect that no one will need to be good. We need to be wary of constructing systems, Connie was reminding me, and feeling like they're so all-encompassing and perfect that we stop actually paying attention to what's going on around us or in our community. Having structures of accountability doesn't relieve us of the responsibility of paying attention to what is going on in the lives of our children, the lives of our youth, the lives of all of those in our community and this community and all communities. Those structures are there to remind us and to help us build safety, but they're no substitute for actual awareness. Think about driving through the city. Take that as an example. There are rules put into place over time to keep us all safe as we navigate our tons of metal and plastic through the streets. I know when I'm driving that there are rules about what I have to do if I want to turn left at a red light. Rules that tell me to use my turn signal. Rules that tell me who has the right of way in any situation. Rules that tell me how fast I can or can't drive, even if my car wants to go faster than that. All these rules to keep me and those around me safe. But what would happen, do you think, if I decided that because there were all these rules, I didn't really need to pay attention when I drove? Just follow the rules exactly. Would you want to be driving near me? Or trying to cross the road when I come along? Or letting your kids near the road? I didn't think so. It's much better for everybody if we're actually paying attention and seeing what's going on. So what keeps us from paying attention and seeing? What is it that keeps us from wanting to see, being able to see? For myself, one thing is that I notice my own history. My experience, for example, of growing up in a community in which abuse happened and was ignored and allowed to continue. That experience instilled in me for a long, long time fear and aversion and anxiety. For the longest time, I didn't want to talk or think about that kind of thing happening. I avoided conversation about it. I look back now and know that I might not have been able to respond in a responsible or constructive or healing way if I'd been confronted with a similar situation. And I've spent a great deal of time and work getting to the point that I can stand in this pulpit and talk to you about these things. I don't tell you that because I want praise or sympathy. I tell you that because I want you to hear that while I certainly did that work for my own well-being, I also did it in order that I be able to respond to abuse and trauma from a place of love and trust, and not just blindly react out of fear and aversion. So a large part of what we need to do to create safe and healthy congregations and communities is, as we ministers in training say, to do our own work, to have clear understandings of what is going on in our lives and in our own histories, so that we know what it is we bring through the door when we enter community. Because the fact of the matter is, our omelos will not fall if we speak up. And it cannot survive if we don't. Our shining city is only possible if we consciously and faithfully construct it so that no one is scapegoated for our happiness, for our identity, for our idols. We can love and stand up for our leaders and our institutions, but blind loyalty is not a faithful choice. And walking away is not an option we can allow ourselves. We need to be able to stay present, to respond with fierce love to the needs of the vulnerable. Our tradition, our Unitarian Universalist tradition, so grounded in the faith that all are loved and all are worthy, grounded in the fierce commitment to honor individual voices at the same time as we revere our deep connection to all life. This is the work of our tradition. The work of creating structures of safety, of paying attention, of healing ourselves in service of being able to see the realities around us. This can be the work of our tradition, of our community. And may our prophetic voice in these issues be heard beyond our walls, calling others to join us in building a world where the voices and the needs of the smallest and most vulnerable among us are heard and responded to with love and fearlessness, and where the powerful and strongest among us are called to the work of justice. Go in peace, friends, to love and serve that world. Blessed be. Now let's sing together one more time. Hymn number 6.